Transformative encounter. CEO discovers hidden truth. When a poor mother and her baby faint, you'd think the hustle and bustle of New York City would harden a man like John Miller, a CEO surrounded by wealth and power. Yet, as he walked through Central Park this morning, something felt different. He reveled in the sleek lines of his tailored suit, but a nagging emptiness shadowed him, as if he wearied of the corporate grind. The chatter of city life melded with the chirping birds, and the breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. But even as spring breathed new life into the city, John's spirit remained stagnant. As he navigated through the throngs of people, a sudden commotion broke the morning calm. A young woman staggered, teetering under the weight of what looked like a heavy bundle. John's heart skipped as he pushed through the crowd, curiosity mingled with trepidation. Before he could grasp the situation, the woman collapsed. The wail of a baby sliced through the city's noise, piercing him with an urgency that went beyond the ordinary. "Help!" he called, his voice cutting through layers of indifference. On impulse, he knelt beside her, cradling the infant in his arms, breathing in the scent of innocence mixed with desperation. As the baby's cries escalated, so did an awakening within him. Her name was Maria, he learned in fraught breaths between the chaos. As they waited for the paramedics, her story spilled out: how she worked tirelessly as a waitress and laborer, her life a relentless loop of broken promises and fading dreams. Each word crushed John under the weight of his corporate success. His world a gilded cage where quarterly earnings reigned felt cold and disconnected compared to the warmth of Maria's struggle. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. In the sterile hospital room, John's chest tightened as he watched Maria fight exhaustion. The innocence of her baby contrasted starkly with the worn lines of her face. How could someone like him, who dined at the finest restaurants and networked with the elite, possibly understand the fierce determination of her existence? The tensions of his polished life collided with the raw struggles of the real world. Her words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the injustice hidden beneath layers of privilege. Then, in a moment of clarity, he found himself offering to mentor her, desperate to forge a bridge between their worlds. But just as he began to envision a transformative path for Maria, the reality of his own company crashed down like a tidal wave. Reports surfaced of exploitative practices, a revelation stark and repelling. The duality of his existence weighed heavily upon him. Loyalties to shareholders and ethical responsibilities battled in his mind, leaving him breathless with uncertainty. Should he uphold corporate interests or confront the monstrous inequities that made his success possible? Questions buried deep within rose unabated, each more daunting than the last. Could he truly embrace integrity when it would cost him everything? As he briskly entered the boardroom for what felt like a reckoning, the stakes had never been higher. Would he choose the paved path of ambition or risk it all for a flicker of hope? The boardroom hummed with the low murmur of anticipation as John took his place at the head of the table. Faces turned to him, calm and expectant. This was the moment to mask uncertainty, to assert control over the narrative that had begun to spiral out of his grasp. Yet, conviction faltered under the weight of his internal storm. His hands clenched tightly against the surface of the table, knuckles whitened, reflecting the tightness in his throat. "John," one of the board members said, a man with a practiced smile, "we need to discuss the quarterly projections. How do you see us moving forward?" The question hung heavy in the air. He felt the eyes, probing, quicksilver assessing his thoughts. But all he could envision was Maria's face, strained with fatigue and desperation. Her story played mercilessly in his mind, clashing with the sterile metrics of profit and loss discussed within these walls. Was he prepared to ignore that? Before we dive into numbers, I need to address something more pressing. The room stilled. He had committed to something he hadn't fully fleshed out. There are ethical concerns regarding our operations that require immediate attention. Whispers cascaded around the long table, resistance bubbling up. What do you mean, ethical concerns? Someone challenged. Our stakeholders expect us to perform. We can't afford any diversions from our goals. But at what cost? John's voice, rising in defiance, surprised even him. We have a responsibility to ensure the well-being of our workers, those who rely on us for their livelihoods. I can't be part of a system that exploits them for profit. He searched their expressions for support, hoping to ignite a flicker of understanding. Instead, he found skepticism. Their eyes spoke of a world he had inhabited, a world conditioned to prioritize results above integrity. I understand the implications this could have on our bottom line, he continued, forcing himself to stay composed. But our strength as a company must come from ethical practices. We should be champions, not exploiters. A heavy silence followed. Finally, Roger, the CFO, leaned forward, an eyebrow raised in challenge. And how do you propose we handle the backlash from our investors? They won't take kindly to any deviation from our current strategy. The confrontation fueled a growing sense of resolve within John. In that moment, he reflected on Maria, her relentless fight for survival. He could feel her strength invigorating his purpose. A drastic shift was needed, a passionate reformation within the very foundation of his company, challenging the status quo. We need to create a framework that supports both our workers and our financial growth. I believe it's not only possible but essential for sustainability. The board murmured again, but John pressed forward, a torrent of ideas forming into a strategy in his mind. He envisioned workshops, open dialogue, perhaps a foundation that connected employees and management, lines of communication previously absent from the sterile corporate culture. Each idea expanded like a web, weaving together a new vision for the future. Let us redefine what it means to be successful, he proposed, feeling the urgency wash over him. His heart raced as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Imagine a company that thrives on its ethics, that champions its people. We could transform our entire industry. For the first time, he felt a spark of possibility, a glimmer of hope stretching across the table, igniting curiosity. Would they rally behind this vision, or was he destined to fight alone against the tide? As the discussion turned into a heated debate, John felt the thrill of combating skepticism. In that whirlwind of voices, conflict solidified his path. But the stakes could very well shatter him. Would he stand firm, forsaking comfort for conviction, or would his ambition slip away like smoke in the wind? The unmistakable sound of alarm bells rang in his chest. The moment of commitment loomed ever closer, and John knew he was running out of time. How far would he go to fight for justice in a world so entrenched in its own interests? Would he dare to face the paradox of ambition and morality head-on? John's pulse quickened as the debate swelled around him, voices rising and intersecting like a fractal of concern and skepticism. The tension coiled tight within him, an urge to shrink back warring with the realization that retreat was no longer an option. He could feel the walls closing in, but instead of faltering, he drew a deep breath. The moment demanded clarity, not just for the board, but for himself. As he mentally sifted through the thoughts colliding inside his mind, a sudden image crystallized: Maria, pushing the carriage through the crowded streets, her face etched with fear about what lay ahead. That relentless determination sparked within him another wave of fervor. Transforming an industry from within wasn't a mere act of defiance, it was a necessity, a potential lifeline for countless others hanging in the balance. Let us break down how we approach our corporate ethos, he thrust forward, channeling the adrenaline. Our values should not only inform our decisions in the boardroom but also manifest in our day-to-day operations. The separation of profit and principle must cease. The board members exchanged glances, their once skeptical expressions cracking slightly, revealing an unexpected kernel of curiosity beneath layers of corporate armor. But this flicker was not enough. He sensed the gap still yawning wide, tension straining uncomfortably in the air. Think about the crisis within our supply chain, he continued. What if we re-evaluated partnerships with vendors who don't share our values? What if we redirected funds towards equitable labor practices? The possibility for positive change exists within our grasp, but we must be willing to take risks. Are you suggesting we jeopardize our existing contracts? Roger's voice cut through, sharper than before, eyes narrowing, willing John to backtrack. I'm suggesting we think bigger than short-term contracts, John replied, steel threading through his voice. We build a reputation that stands for something meaningful. This will increase consumer trust and loyalty. And that, Roger, translates into long-term profitability. We have to shift the narrative from mere survival to true resilience. The silence weighed heavy for a moment. With every tensioned heartbeat, John sensed the growing momentum. Could he shift their mindset to align with an ethical obligation rather than merely calculating risks? The battle was less about convincing others and more about solidifying his own beliefs before them. Their acceptance was secondary to his commitment. In the pocket of that silence, imagery of Maria and her baby re-emerged, glaringly evident. The impact of simple decisions cascaded into long-term ramifications for families like hers, lives unseen that were bound by choices made corporate offices away. I propose a pilot program, he pressed onward, determination sharpening his thoughts like a blade. Let us start with one division. Implement ethical labor practices and sustainable sourcing. We can measure results, both ethical and financial, and report back to the board with transparency. If we are committed to true change, we must be willing to test our theories in practice. At this, John detected a shift, a subtle thawing of reluctance among the board members. Pragmatism crept into their considerations. Will you risk your position backing this pilot? Someone asked, the challenge unmistakable. The quiet ripples of doubt surrounding the room echoed in his mind. Risk his position, risk being sidelined or caricatured as a dreamer? No. The stakes weren't merely professional, they were personal, deeply tied to a wider ethics he believed must guide this company. Absolutely, John said firmly, his eyes scanning the room. I am ready to gamble my future for this change, because if we ignore the ethical consequences today, tomorrow's humanity in our industry will be lost. As murmurs began again, a quiet storm brewed over the table. John felt a coil of hope unfurl. His resolve crystallized into fierce capability. He realized he wasn't merely advocating for justice, but for the soul of the company itself. Yet, amidst this burgeoning empowerment emerged a haunting question. What would the consequences be, not just for him but for everyone involved? As the meeting began to wrap, dread settled into his thoughts, a final bell tolling. Could ethical aspirations reshape their reality, or would self-interest prevail, igniting insurmountable turmoil? The moment was charged, and John felt the pivotal decision weighing on his very future. Would he be courageous enough to dive deeper into the unknown, or would he let fear dictate his choices? The following day dawned with a subtle weight pressing down on John's chest. The meeting had ended, but its implications lingered like a shadow. As he sat at his desk, the sun filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. He usually appreciated such moments of quiet, an oasis amid corporate chaos, but today they manifested only the echo of unresolved anxiety. He thought of the board members' faces, a blend of skepticism and latent curiosity, stirred by his audacity. Yet deep down, amid his growing resolve, a seed of self-doubt took root. Had he truly been persuasive, or merely performed a desperate soliloquy? The question gnawed at him as he blinked at his spreadsheets, figures swarming like bees around their hive. Instead of finding solace in numerical data, his mind wandered back to Maria and her struggle, the faces he had seen on the streets during his commutes. Real stories inhabited those expressions, and for the first time, John allowed himself to imagine the process behind transforming corporate ideals into reality. What would changes in policy mean for workers like Maria? How would they navigate interference from entrenched interests? He stood abruptly, forcing a surge of energy through his body. He would not become stagnant now, not when the stakes were undeniably high. John resolved to conduct a personal project that would ground his advocacy in real-world consequences. Research took the greater part of the day. He delved into not just ethical sourcing but also labor rights, studying successful companies that made the transition from conventional to standout ethical practices. Each PDF he downloaded brought clarity, an unfolding narrative about organizations that had dared to march against opposition, earning both applause and admonishment. During his lunch break, he took a handwritten list to a nearby cafe, potential partners, suppliers, community leaders. Each name bore a spark of curiosity for how they could fulfill ethical commitments. By the time he set the list aside, though, another niggling feeling clawed at him. What if these prospective partners were too mired in their own reality to understand his vision? Doubts rushed in again, unhinging his newfound momentum. What kept surfacing unexpectedly were personal anecdotes from employees, not corporate jargon or skewed statistics, but heartfelt testimonies about the struggles faced daily. It made him realize, with eerie resonance, that the battle ahead was not only against the inertia of the board but the very fabric of institutional apathy encapsulating their operations. As the afternoon wore on, a knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. In walked Tessa, one of the junior analysts. Her face held a mix of admiration and concern. "I heard what you pitched yesterday. Courage is inspiring, but I think you'd do well to prepare contingency strategies. What happens if the board rejects the pilot?" "Then we recalibrate and push again," he replied, realizing he spoke the words with unshakable conviction. "And if they fire you?" she pressed. John drew a deep breath, feeling the heaviness of that reality. "Then I'll be free to advocate without constraints," he replied, a sudden clarity dawning on him. This wasn't about keeping a position, it was about being true to his values, a principle worth fighting for. Discussion morphed through analysis and strategy, igniting a collaborative energy that enveloped them both. Tessa's input opened doors he hadn't considered, each idea sharpening his vision for what ethical leadership could entail. As thoughts crystallized into actionable plans, a sense of purpose surged within John. The impending challenge turned from a source of dread to a platform for potential growth. While he may face opposition and criticism, he was armed with conviction and an unrelenting desire for change, yet, as assurances built around him, a shadow lingered. Was his newfound resolve sustainable under the onslaught of real consequences? What challenges awaited in the terrain of corporate ethics, particularly from those who would profit from the status quo? With these doubts flickering like ghosts in his mind, he prepared to step into a world that may either elevate him or fracture every belief that had steeled his resolve. The battle ahead would not only reshape the company but also lay the groundwork for his existential self-discovery. Little did he know, a personal encounter on the streets would soon send his plans spiraling in a direction he never anticipated. John's routine had settled into a fragile rhythm, each day a careful balance of burgeoning ambition and unchecked anxiety. The more detailed his plans grew, the more he became acutely aware of the obstacles ahead. He spent hours poring over labor rights initiatives and the intricacies of supply chain ethics, scribbling thoughts and strategies in the margins of hastily compiled reports. Yet, although he felt informed, the looming uncertainty clawed at his heart. That Wednesday, he found himself moving through a maze of beings, his colleagues engaged in the usual clamor of trading ideas, negotiating deals, and solving problems of profit margins. Each conversation felt increasingly hollow to him. The faces around him seemed to reflect a commerce that thrived on erasure, the very principles that had ignited his passion for change lurking beneath the veneer of corporate gloss. His resolve to effect change grew clearer, but so did the realization that he must venture beyond this glass-walled cocoon. As he shuffled through the lobby, he spotted Tessa again. She was animatedly discussing project timelines with another analyst, gesturing with her hands, a stark contrast to his solemnity. "Hey, John," she called, breaking her flow. "There's an outreach initiative downtown this weekend. Why not check it out? You might find some good connections, real connections." Her suggestion pricked at his growing restlessness. Should he immerse himself in their world to seek understanding firsthand rather than from a distance? Doubt flickered across his mind. Was he ready to face the authenticity of hardship without a shield of corporate sophistry? After a moment's hesitation, a twinge of determination propelled him to nod. "I'll go," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. As the days slipped by, the weight of anticipation filled him. Arriving at the outreach program that Saturday, he slipped on a name tag that read John, corporate advocate. He felt like a wolf in sheep's clothing. The mismatch was palpable. Yet, he also felt exhilarated at the prospect of leaving the boardroom behind, if only for a few hours, standing amid the chaos of bustling charities, struggling families, and industrious volunteers. He was overwhelmed by the unfiltered reality surrounding him. Everywhere he turned, he witnessed tales of resilience and despair unfolding, the faces of mothers cradling infants, children giggling over last-minute handouts, and individuals eager for a moment of connection. Just as he began to settle into this newfound space of compassion, the piercing cry of a baby shattered his reverie. John instinctively turned as a woman crumpled to the ground, her baby sliding from her grasp. Time stopped. Immediately, a sense of urgency seized him as others rushed to render aid. As he found himself kneeling beside her, the world around him faded. He locked eyes with the mother, her face a mask of fear and exhaustion. "Help us," she gasped, gripping his arm with trembling hands. He felt the enormity of her situation crash down upon him, a visceral realization of the struggles faced by so many. In that moment, John was no longer just an outsider with ideas, he was called to be an integral part of a narrative that intertwined with systems he sought to change. Reflection spiraled within him. How often had he read about statistics and success stories? Those numbers had never been so human or urgent. This encounter would surely ignite a fire beneath him. This was not merely a corporate pivot, it was an era of awareness, understanding, and possibility. Yet, as paramedics arrived, he felt a daunting clarity emerge alongside this motivation. What could he realistically offer? All his corporate polish felt inadequate compared to the rawness of her situation, the stakes weighing more than his well-constructed arguments. Watching her taken away, John found himself propelled into the grip of a monumental decision. If he was to make a real difference, he would have to relinquish his comfort zone entirely, embark on a journey that might redefine everything he thought he knew. With his heart pounding, he resolved to connect. The chapter of a new life had begun, one where the demands of his role would collide head-on with the acute needs of real people. Navigating this murky terrain of compassion and responsibility would not be without peril. As he departed, his mind whirred with thoughts of how to act on this profound encounter. But in the recesses of his psyche, he was also aware that confronting the monsters within the corporate machine would be the fiercest battle yet. Could he champion their plight, and at what personal cost? In that uncertainty, John stood on the precipice of transformation, brimming with eagerness yet aware that newfound courage might soon clash with unforgiving realities. What revelations awaited him around the next corner? Everything about the last few days felt distorted as John returned to his company, each office plant and polished desk a reminder of the stark contrast between his two worlds. He moved through the hallways as if they were a dream, a sense of detachment settling in. The energy he usually drew from the corporate environment now felt suffocating, like a tight noose around his resolve. The week ahead was set to be a whirlwind of meetings and presentations, typical corporate fare, yet all he could think about was the woman on the ground, the desperation in her eyes. The team's discussions about metrics and profit margins seemed to fade into a surreal background noise. His colleagues engaged in conversations that practically danced around the very issues he now felt compelled to address. He felt himself starting to question everything he had accepted without scrutiny. By Thursday, his need for action had fermented into something urgent. John began drafting a proposal with a radically different approach. Instead of solely focusing on bottom lines and statistics, he wanted to embed empathy and a deeper understanding of socioeconomic disparity into their corporate policy. He poured his emotions onto the page, every word a testament to his recent experience. He highlighted the importance of investing in community development and sustainable practices that genuinely supported the underprivileged, rather than ticking boxes for corporate social responsibility. Yet, as he worked, doubts gnawed at him. What if they rejected his suggestions? What if he was unable to articulate the depth of his conviction? The vision he had was tethered to his encounter, and without that authenticity, would anyone believe in his mission? On the verge of a meltdown, he decided he needed to confront his boss, Marjorie. She was pragmatic to a fault and rarely entertained any shift from their usual narrative of profits over people. As he paced in front of her office door, his pulse quickened. Would he genuinely be able to convey the urgency of what he envisioned? He hesitated for a split second, but then forced himself to knock. "Come in," she called from inside. John stepped into her office, his heart pounding louder than the hum of the air conditioning. The walls adorned with accolades served as a reminder of the weight of this confrontation. He stood there, framed by an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. "Marjorie, I'd like to discuss a proposal that might reshape our approach to community engagement." Her expression remained unreadable. He continued, each word taking on a life of its own, rapid-fire explanations spilling forth about how empathy-driven initiatives could actually bolster productivity. He noticed the slight furrow in her brow, the disbelief brewing behind her composed facade. "It's about real impact, we can't ignore the human side," he insisted, the memory of the mother pushing him forward each time he faltered. When he finished, silence enveloped them. Marjorie leaned back, steepling her fingers, contemplation flickering in her eyes. "You're asking us to gamble on a shift that might not yield immediate returns, John. Is that really the direction you want us to take?" His stomach twisted as he acknowledged the truth behind her question. What drove him to take this risk? Was it personal attachment, ethical responsibility, or a deeper professional awakening? He found himself weighing ambition against the call of a higher purpose. "Yes," he asserted. "It's the direction we need to take if we want to be more than just a company that profits off the marginalized." Her gaze softened slightly, but the smile did not come. "I'll consider it," she said finally, yet the ambiguity hung heavily in the air. As he left her office, uncertainty simmered within him. What if the walls meant to uphold ambition also contained the very frameworks he sought to dismantle? A chasm between intention and impact loomed, and he was faced with the uncomfortable truth that change would demand more from him than just a proposal. He needed to cultivate alliances, face his discomfort head-on, and dare to stand unfazed, even when confronting the very system designed to resist such upheaval. His thoughts raced ahead. While the initial conversation had ended, the true challenge was just beginning. If he wanted to wield influence, it would require all the courage and resilience he had in reserve. With that realization came a resurgence of determination. Soon, he would need to gather his allies, co-workers who shared the same passion behind their polished exteriors. But could he trust them with his vision? And what would happen when he had to present his ideas not just to Marjorie but to the board as a whole? The swirling uncertainties ahead became a tempest, each possibility igniting both fear and excitement within him. He had begun to awaken that latent ambition, but would he be able to steer it towards genuine, transformational change? Each day pulled him closer to a showdown against the curriculums of comfort in his professional life. Desiring to break free, he realized a reckoning was on the horizon. The question remained, would he dare to confront it fully? John spent the next couple of days absorbed in his thoughts, wrestling with the implications of Marjorie's response. Each time he passed her office, he felt a push and pull within himself, an internal struggle that mirrored the dance of ambition and empathy that now occupied his mind. As meetings loomed, he pondered not only how to articulate his vision but also who might stand beside him in the fight for a new approach. Deciding to reach out, he scheduled informal conversations with a handful of colleagues he believed might share his urgency. Some were quiet, reserved individuals who often seemed at odds with the cutthroat mentality of corporate life. John hoped that the times he had shared laughs, struggles, or late-night brainstorming sessions with them had forged a bond strong enough for this endeavor. He chose a corner table at a nearby cafe for their first gathering, hoping an unassuming environment would disarm them. As they settled, he braced himself. Would they engage, or would they dismiss his ideas as impractical musings? He kicked off the conversation, sharing snippets of his recent emotional upheaval and his vision for a shift in corporate policy. Their reactions ranged from thoughtful nods to skeptical glances. Mary, a junior analyst known for her fierce intelligence, furrowed her eyebrows. "We are a profit-driven entity, John. What you're suggesting sounds noble, but isn't it a bit idealistic?" Her words struck a chord. Idealism, after all, had been accused of being the naive cousin of ambition. "I understand that mindset, but think about it. What if our profit could derive from genuine community ties and sustainable practices?" he countered, laying a vision of symbiosis before them. "It's about reforming our identity, not just our objective." One by one, he articulated examples from companies that had successfully integrated empathy-driven frameworks and emerged more robust than before. Tension filled the air as they debated the practicality of his ideas. At times, it felt like the conversation would spiral out of control, arguments growing louder as emotions bubbled beneath the surface, yet, John sensed moments of crackling connection too. A smirk from Alex, the quiet tech wizard, signaled his engagement. A spark ignited in Sophie's eyes when he emphasized the importance of genuine impact over perceived value. It was these connections, small but significant, that fueled his determination. Even as some dismissed the audacity of his proposals, he could see a flicker of intrigue. This wasn't just about convincing them, it was about creating a shared vision, a movement that transcended individual career aspirations. After the meeting, John felt invigorated yet anxious. Gathering allies was only the first step, and he knew he had to continue building rapport. The rhythm of his heart echoed against an impending anxiety, showing vulnerability was primal, yet it was also liberating. This newfound courage was becoming a tangible part of him, a force stronger than any fear of rejection, but the looming board meeting remained a dark cloud on the horizon. Days passed, and he began rehearsing what he would say to them. He imagined their stoic faces, each a wall of skepticism he would need to break through. Somehow, he would need to convert the board's emphasis on profit into a new agenda grounded in empathy and community. That evening, after hours spent refining his talking points, John sat on his couch, staring blankly at the screen in front of him. He was exhausted. A mixture of dread and excitement surged within. Did he believe enough in his vision to convince them? Could he wield the power of his experiences, the insights gleaned from the ground, and make them resonate? While casting his mind forward to the board presentation, dread trickled in. The stakes were high, and it would take everything he had to present this to the best of his ability. He would need to embody the change he was advocating for. As he rested his head against the soft cushions, a sudden thought pierced through the haze of fatigue. What if they had no intention of listening? The question floated heavy in the air. What if the very environment he longed to innovate was already entrenched in a commitment to business as usual? John's resolve flickered as he faced the cold reality that remained. The invisible barriers of complacency threatened to harden, but as darkness began to settle around him, he glimpsed a flicker of light. A sense of purpose burgeoned within, urging him to ignite the courage he had just begun to uncover. The moment of truth drew closer, demanding his focus like the urgent thrumming of a heartbeat. But could a single voice rise against the tidal wave of indifference, or would it simply be swallowed whole? John awoke the next morning with the distant hum of anxiety still clinging to him like a second skin. He had hardly slept, his mind wrestling between echoes of skepticism and a flicker of hope. The board meeting approached with relentless inevitability, and he needed to be ready. After breakfast, he framed the day's agenda, articulate his vision, engage his colleagues further, and gather more insights. The cafe where they had convened stirred up fond memories of the initial meeting. He decided to return, hopeful that the familiar setting would spark new ideas among his peers. Sitting outside, with the sun breaking through the clouds, he could have sworn there was a shift in the air. Taking a deep breath to center himself, he mentally prepared for another round of discussion. Alex arrived first, sliding into the seat across from him, his eyes bright with an urgency that mirrored John's. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said the other day," he admitted, his voice lowered like they were sharing a secret. "What if we could actually change things? What would that really look like?" Encouraged, John shared his evolving vision, fine-tuning the practicalities he hadn't fully fleshed out before. They bounced ideas off each other, dissecting market trends and consumer behavior, analyzing potential partnerships with nonprofits that could amplify their message. The more they discussed, the clearer John's strategy became. Sophie joined next, her presence crackling with energy. "I've been drawing parallels between your approach and how some tech companies operate. They're built on community input," she said, tapping her finger against the table. "People are more loyal to brands that see them as contributors, not just consumers." Her perspective opened a new avenue John hadn't explored. As the discussions deepened, so did his conviction. He realized that each conversation was chiseling away at his fear, carving out confidence where uncertainty used to dwell. The energy shifted. He felt less like a lone voice in a corporate wilderness and more like a facilitator aiding a collective transformation. That evening, the group assembled again, now with a list of concrete examples and strategies they could present to the board. John took on the role of connector, nurturing their contributions and weaving them into a larger narrative. Hours vanished as they conjured connections, and this feeling of unity propelled him further along his path. The days that followed were consumed in a whirlwind of preparation. John began to envision the boardroom not as a bastion of unwavering authority, but as an arena for ideas, a space he could disrupt with the potential for meaningful change. On the eve of the board meeting, doubt crept into John's mind again as he sat alone in his living room. He replayed moments where colleagues had given him skeptical looks, moments when ambition felt more like a fleeting whim than a tangible pursuit. Yet, alongside those memories, he discovered a profound resilience. The litany of voices that had rallied around his thoughts began to quiet his fears. "Focus on the impact," he whispered to himself, recalling the earnest exchanges with his colleagues. "Lead with purpose." As he closed his eyes, envisioning how he'd frame his arguments, he heard a sudden knock on the door, snapping him from his thoughts. Reluctantly, he rose, opening to find a neighbor, a single mother standing pale and sweating. Behind her, a baby cried inconsolably. Panic surged. He quickly ushered her inside. "Let me help," he said, fueled by instinct. It was a shift from his internal corporate battle to an immediate human connection, grounding him in the real stakes of empathy and community. As he called for assistance, an unwavering realization dawned upon him. Every step toward change was more significant than he ever conceived. Yet standing there, waiting for the help to arrive, he faced another moment of truth. He was pushed to assess not just the meeting at work, but how he would influence the lives around him, seizing the broader implications of his aspirations. The stakes had multiplied, challenging him to consider how deeply his vision could ripen into reality. Would he grasp this opportunity to redefine what being a leader truly meant, or would he falter in the face of urgency? As uncertainty danced in the air, John felt the pivotal moment upon him. Tomorrow, the board meeting loomed. Today, a life hung in the balance. John inhaled sharply, the premature weight of the board meeting pushed aside by the immediate urgency in front of him. The baby's cries echoed through the silence of his living room, raw and desperate. He turned to his neighbor, her eyes wide with fear, and he felt the gravity of the situation tighten around him like a rope. "Stay calm," he said gently, though his own heart raced. "Let us get your baby settled, and then we can talk." As he ushered her inside, he could feel the gravity of his actions alter his perspective on the day ahead. The challenge of a corporate pitch paled in comparison to the urgency of this moment. That he quickly located a blanket and helped the mother take a seat on the couch, cradling her child in her arms. The baby's cries began to soften as John managed to locate a bottle of formula. He warmed it and handed it to her, watching as the child greedily drew nourishment. "You're doing great," he murmured, but his thoughts were racing. Was his drive for professional achievement worth it if he stood by while others struggled? The disconnect felt wider than ever, and he was faced with questions that demanded answers. What kind of leader did he aspire to be? Could the lessons he learned in this moment transfer into the corporate world he was about to step back into? The initial panic faded, and the mother's breath steadied. John could see the flicker of gratitude in her eyes, reminding him of the human connections that often bridged the divide of ambition and empathy. For a moment, he allowed himself to wonder how that same empathy might translate into his work. As she nursed the baby, he contemplated how this experience informed his leadership aspirations. The idea of fostering change was more than just numbers or strategies. It meant understanding the people affected by those strategies, the ones he might never interact with directly. They were the reason his company's existence mattered. Once the baby finished, he took a moment before speaking again. "What's your name?" he asked softly, genuinely. "Lena," she replied, and a warmth developed in the room, formed by shared humanity rather than the cold efficiency of business speak. "Lena, what do you need right now?" This simple question, a decision to elevate the conversation beyond mere survival, shifted something in him. "Just support," she replied, turning the vulnerability of her situation inside out. As she spoke, John recognized an opportunity to grow, to build a foundation of empathy that transcended the confines of profit margins and market strategies. Here, in his living room, notions of leadership crystallized around him, and a truth emerged: true leadership requires deeper connections, not just strategic ones. It's about recognizing that every decision he made in the boardroom could ripple through lives like Lena's. When help finally arrived, an aide who took over for him, John felt an unmistakable shift within. He stepped out of his home, guided by a newfound purpose. The board meeting was not just a moment to prove his worth, it could become a platform for real change. This revelation surged within him, and he felt invigorated. The challenges he once faced seemed more manageable, ambitious yet achievable. What other hidden truths lay just beyond his comfort zone? As he approached the boardroom door the next day, a sense of anticipation gripped him, the stakes of his pitch well beyond numbers and presentation. It was a chance to advocate for the real lives behind the data. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Would he rise to the occasion and infuse the corporate world with the humanity imbued by his unexpected encounter? The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, the daunting question: was he prepared to confront the deeper implications of his leadership? John stepped into the boardroom, the familiar surroundings now charged with a tension he had never before experienced. There had been countless meetings where he championed profits over principles, but today was different. Today, he would advocate for a transformation guided by empathy and ethical responsibility. As he shuffled through his notes, he glimpsed the board members' expectant faces, the stern gazes he had dreaded. A wave of self-doubt surged momentarily, but he quickly dismissed it. Maria, Lena, and countless others flashed through his mind, motivating him with their resilience. This was not merely a presentation, this was an opportunity to shift the very fabric of the company he led. "Thank you for gathering today," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm here to discuss how we can redefine our corporate identity through a lens of empathy and social responsibility." He took a breath, feeling the support of his colleagues who had joined him in spirit. The board listened, some with furrowed brows while others exchanged skeptical glances. John pressed on, articulating not just ideas but his deeply personal experiences. Highlighting successful companies that prioritized ethical practices, he showcased how meaningful connections with communities translated into sustainable growth. The room, once a sepulchre of cold indifference, began to resonate with curiosity. "Imagine a company that doesn't simply extract profit but fosters a legacy of trust," he urged, passion igniting within him. "Investing in our communities and prioritizing the welfare of our workers will not only benefit those we serve but will enhance our market positioning, creating a narrative that consumers respect and support." As he continued laying out his proposal, he noticed nods of agreement from Tessa and a few others who had believed in him from the start. Their palpable support bolstered his confidence. For every challenge from the board, he conjured a counterargument: "We are navigating an era where businesses favor transparency and integrity. We can lead the charge or be left behind." When Roger interrupted with a question about potential backlash from investors, John was ready. "The very fact that we are discussing this means we already carry the risk of stagnation. Let us flip the narrative, let us showcase how we are a responsible leader rather than a mere cog in the machine of capitalism." Gradually, a murmur spread across the room. Interest mingled with skepticism, but curiosity began to break through the cold surface of apprehension. This shift was palpable, he could sense the tides turning as resistance softened. Let us start with a pilot program, John proposed, drawing on recent research. We'll implement ethical labor practices in one division and measure the outcomes. By showcasing this success, we can iterate our approach and engage stakeholders without alienating them. His words struck a chord, holding space for a collaborative dialogue to flourish. For the first time, the boardroom wasn't just filled with suits and power posturing, but a gathering of potential allies. He moved seamlessly from discussing strategies to unveiling the soul of what it meant to be part of an organization that prioritized people over profits. After lengthy discussions that challenged his convictions and propelled them toward collective insights, John felt he was not just standing at the podium advocating for change. He was leading a renaissance within the company he had previously only viewed through the narrow lens of profit margins. By the time the meeting concluded, he sensed a defining moment had arrived. As he left the boardroom, a palpable shift coursed through him. He had initiated a movement, taking firm steps toward tangible reform that shaped both his professional and personal identity. Facing the stakes head-on, John had affirmed his convictions and proven his capacity to adapt and lead with integrity. He didn't just achieve a corporate pivot, he embarked on a journey of authentic leadership cultivated through vulnerability, experience, and an unwavering commitment to others. When he finally returned home that day, feeling a sense of accomplishment buoy him, he understood that his role had transformed. He was no longer simply a CEO dictated by quarterly reports, he was a champion for justice, guided by the humanity that coursed through the very essence of his company. In that realization, he felt a solid confidence take root. John had conquered the inner turmoil that held him captive for too long. In a world often driven by self-interest, he had chosen to prove that ethical leadership was not just possible but essential. He embraced his commitment to others as a guiding principle, standing poised as a trailblazer within corporate America, not just for himself but for every worker and community that would benefit from his vision. This was the moment of true transformation. Now it's your turn. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a difference. Comment with your reactions and theories about this ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.